Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today we will discuss about uh, oral communication and interpersonal communication. And if the time permits us, then we will obviously also discuss about some sort of written communication as well. So these are some of the major topics of the course. Yesterday we discussed about the introduction to communication. The basic concepts were discussed about purpose of communication, um, uh, the process of communication, barriers to communication, the importance and the role of communication, and as we have discussed yesterday about organizational communication as well. Today we will focus on oral communication and interpersonal communication. Right. So first of all, I would like to share some screen, the files, obviously, with you guys, and then we're going to start with our lecture. So as you can see on the screen, the first topic which we have to discuss, this is the third topic of your syllabus, and this has to do with oral communication. And obviously, you guys know about what oral communication is, and it involves speaking and also listening. So we have to discuss some of the characteristics of it. As written over here, oral communication describes any type of interaction between individuals which makes use of words and involves speaking and listening. In oral communication, the sender and receiver exchange their thoughts or ideas verbally. We can also share it with non-verbal communication as well. For example, with our body movements, with our gestures, because we are normally doing face-to-face communication in oral communication. So not only that we are speaking and listening to the words, we can also understand what kind of these signs or signals or gestures the speaker is giving to us if we are, for example, listening. And obviously, when speakers and listeners are involved in oral communication, they not just discuss words, they discuss ideas, thoughts, feelings, and the other things as well. As far as the advantage of oral communication is concerned, obviously it is swift, or you can say fast, and it's fast, or you can say quick communication happens, because mostly we are doing face-to-face communication and oral communication. So it happens spontaneously, right? And it's quicker as well. And it's you can say, if we talk about written communication, it takes time, a lot of time, but oral communication can just happen when you are obviously face to face and in front of the people. It's more direct, right? Direct means, because as I said, it happens spontaneously and face to face. So direct in the sense that we come to the main point straight away, rather than just mentioning about the background or the purpose of coming for communication. We come to the main ideas. We discuss the main ideas quickly, and then we can provide some explanation later on. Interactive is obviously interaction. It involves interaction. That is, you change your roles. Sometimes you become a speaker. Sometimes you have to listen to the other person. It is, you can say, timely as well. First, if you are speaking, then the other person has to be silent, and when the other person takes turn to speak, you have to be silent at that time, so that you can understand what the other person is saying. So it's interactive. You can ask questions. You can interrupt anyone as well if you want. Flexibility has to do with you can say, one of the advantage of oral communication is it's quite flexible. Sometimes it happens that when we talk about written communication, there you cannot do any mistakes. You cannot have grammatical mistakes, or your words should be spelled properly. Your writing has to be organized well. But here you have got a lot of flexibility. You can obviously sometimes break grammatical rules as well. If the other person can understand you, it's okay sometimes. And obviously it can be disorganized sometimes as well, oral communication. Although there is some sort of organizational pattern which we have to follow, even when we are speaking or listening or involved in oral communication, but you have a lot of flexibility over here. Instant feedback, yes. In written communication, it takes a lot of time when you send a message, the receiver will give feedback uh, after taking a lot of time. But in oral communication, it happens quickly, obviously, because mostly we are doing face-to-face communication. So whatever you are speaking, whatever you are sending the message, whatever type of message you are sending, you get the feedback instantly. You get the feedback there and then. Non-verbal signs and signals, yes. Not only that, we are focusing on words when we are communicating orally. We can notice the facial expressions of the people who are involved in the communication. We can also understand, for example, the signals or the cues or the hints given by the listener to the sender, or what the sender sometimes, obviously, the body movements can also be noticed and other things. So it's not only just verbal; it is also non-verbal. Communication also happens at that time. Sensitive handling, exactly, because you can understand the expressions of the participants. You can understand what are their thoughts and feelings at the moment when you're speaking or listening to the people. So you can obviously handle the situation properly. In writing, obviously, you do not get this kind of advantage, because when you send a message, you do not know what kind of feelings or the reaction can come from the from the reader or the receiver of the message. But here, obviously, you can easily understand how the message is taken up, how the receiver responds to the message which you have sent. So sensitive handling is one of the advantage of oral communication. Yes, because these are the topics which are also given in ICMA study text as well, so you can go and read from there as well. So, but we can move on now. After discussing the advantages, we can move on to the disadvantages, by the way. Right. One of the disadvantage of oral communication is you can face a lot of barriers in the communication process. With the obviously one barrier which can be considered as a common barrier for oral communication is the physical barrier, which has to do with the environment, or which has to do with external barrier. It's known as external barrier. We were also discussing about it yesterday when we were discussing about the process of communication. So physical barriers or physical noise can create a lot of distractions or interruptions. Physical in the sense, obviously, we discussed yesterday that anything which is external to our body and mind, uh, external to the person's body or mind, can be physical distraction or barrier. The noise coming from the fan, or the noise of the air condition, or some generator, or traffic, can be all physical barriers which can obviously interrupt the flow of communication when you are involved in oral communication. Technical, obviously, sometimes if you are using some device for oral communication, not oral communication just does not happen with face-to-face communication, but it can also happen by using some sort of computer-mediated device or some other kind of device, for example, a telephone or a mobile phone. So if there are some sort of distortions or noise or interruptions in the network, or so you can face this kind of errors in the oral communication. You may not be able to understand what the speaker has spoken, or listening becomes difficult sometimes when you're doing oral communication by using a device. Right. One of the disadvantage of oral communication can be related to memory, because whatever kind of because memory has to do not just stores of the information, but it is also used for obviously in remembering something, or you can say your memory has a lot of other things uh, in it. For example, or you have emotions and feelings as well. So if you're not in the right frame of mind when you're communicating with someone, obviously it can affect your oral communication. Differences in perception, obviously this can be one of the barriers as well, disadvantage as well, because if you are having perceptions, what are perceptions? We discussed yesterday as well. Perceptions are obviously when you are making sense of the reality around you, and these perceptions are very difficult to change. You can actually perceive things differently than the other individuals. Everyone can have different type of perceptions about the world, about the people, about the things around them. And obviously, if you are obviously it can consist some of the beliefs or attitudes or values which you have, and if it's very difficult to change those beliefs, if there are differences, a lot of major differences between the speaker and the listener, perception differences, obviously it becomes difficult. All communication becomes difficult. Less time for planning, obviously. Sometimes you do not get enough time to plan for how you will be communicating with the other person. So that can also be one of the disadvantage of communication. When you're writing something, obviously you can take a lot of time, but as I said, oral communication is more spontaneous. You have to speak at the moment when the people are communicating with you at that time, obviously. So you will get less time for planning. Person's credibility, personality may affect communication. Exactly. The people who are involved in oral communication, the speakers and the listeners, their credibility can also have an effect on the communication. If one person has a higher credibility than the other person, obviously the one the one person will become more dominant. You can say the other person will feel weak about as far as his credibility is concerned. So you can if you have a higher credibility than the other person, obviously you can influence the other person easily. You can some sort of personality clashes as well, right? And other things may also affect, for example, your status in the society. So can also have an effect on the oral communication when you are doing it. Other factors, for example, if you are more qualified, more knowledgeable, more experienced than the other person, obviously sometimes you can easily influence other participant in the communication process, right? And so differences in the knowledge, experience, credibility, personality may have a major effect on the oral communication, the kind of communication or the result which you want to achieve through it can be quite you can say different than what you're expecting. Right. So after discussing about the advantages and disadvantages, we have to discuss other things about oral communication. Oral communication has many forms. You can just notice through your experiences that one type of oral communication is obviously face-to-face conversation. So, for example, when you are doing it in an interview, when you're communicating or having a conversation with the interviewer, or one person can be an interviewer, the other person can be interviewee. So face-to-face interactions or conversations can happen. This is one form of oral communication. Grapevine communication, as discussed yesterday when we were discussing about informal communication network. Grapevine and people are involved in doing grapevine communication or gossiping, which is also known as gossip. Grapevine communication, talking about different kinds of topics which are not officially accepted, or you can say which are not part of official communication in the organization. Sometimes people obviously they exchange or transfer official messages with each other, but sometimes it happens that if they have got extra time, if you have done the work, you are normally involved in gossiping around. You talk to people about different topics which are not related to your organization or your official matters. So this is one form of oral communication, right? Uh, yeah. So oral communication can also happen during negotiations. Negotiation is when there are two parties at least, and they are having some sort of disagreement, or you can say when one party wants to dominate the other party. For example, you must have noticed many times in the news, on the media, that some sort of negotiations are going about related to the politics or between countries, and they want to have some sort of consensus during negotiations, or some sort of agreements can be made, but that can only happen if both the parties agree or negotiate by taking something or giving something. So this is one type or form of oral communication. Meetings obviously whenever you are meeting with people, whenever you are, you can say, for example, business meetings, there people are involved in oral communication. Presentations where one person is giving a presentation, for example, in the classroom, a student giving presentation to other students, that can also be an example of oral communication. Lectures, yes, you normally take lectures in your classrooms. Obviously, this is another. Debates, as you know, in debates as well, argumentation is goes on like negotiations. In negotiations as well, argumentation happens. But debates, yes, we are involved in arguing about something. We can talk in favor of something or against something in debates, and obviously. People are doing oral communication at that time. There are some participants who are speakers, and some of them are obviously listeners. Speeches, yes, this is one way communication, by the way. Speeches where the speaker is giving a speech, and the rest of the audience, there can be many people at a time or just one person at a time, right, listening to the speech. This can be we can say one type of communication. This is more one-way communication rather than two-way communication. Here it happens in the speeches that one person is speaking, the others are listening. Telephonic conversations, yes, it's common to obviously be involved in oral communication by using some of the mechanical devices, like as I said, telephone or mobile phones. So that is also one form of oral communication. Next, we move on to the principles of successful oral communication. This is an important topic as well. Um, Principles, you can say rules, or you can say the things which are required for doing successful oral communication. Obviously, if you want to succeed in oral communication, if you want to speak or listen properly, you should plan your communication before you even say something or speak about something. So it should be well planned. Obviously, we do not have enough time for planning in oral communication, but at some level, it has to be well planned. Whenever you are speaking, whenever obviously you are speaking to people, you should try to pronounce the words properly with proper pronunciation, right, with proper accent, with proper style, obviously, so that the other people can understand what you are saying. One of the principle of oral communication is brevity. Brevity has to do with conciseness. As we have discussed yesterday about the characteristics of communication. One of the characteristics or C's, as we discussed yesterday about 7 C's of communication. One of the most important characteristic of communication is conciseness. You have to be as brief as possible, right? And you should not try to use irrelevant terms, right? You should not try to be you can say you need to be brief and specific, more specific, and more you can say you should use as few words as possible to to convey your ideas and thoughts to the other people. Precision, as we said, you need to be specific, you need to be relevant, you need to speak about definite things, right? Relevant things which are relevant for the audience, right? You have to focus on what are the audience needs. Natural voice exactly cannot be pretentious, or you should not try to show off when you are communicating in orally, because it's always better to use your natural tone or voice, so that other people are normally okay with they have an experience that they may have an experience, they have already heard you many times. So when you actually change your accent or you change your natural voice, they may feel you can say they may not feel comfortable with it, and as a speaker you may also not be, you can say, favored or appreciated. Logical sequence, yes, in some way obviously we have to organize our whole communication. In some way we have to follow some sort of process or logical sequence, and we need to talk about different issues point by point, you can say, or idea, each idea at a time, so that some sort of a sequence or organizational pattern can be noticed by the listeners. So that is what some of the principles of successful oral communication are. The rest of the things you can read from the study text which you have, obviously. Then we move on to the for major topic for as far as this course is concerned. Within the oral communication, the main topic which we have to discuss is conversational control. What is this conversational control? Conversational control refers to obviously to the skills of listening and talking in a positive and meaningful way at an appropriate time. So you need to first of all decide what time is appropriate to communicate with the other people, to have control in your conversation. First of all, you need to obviously talk positively and in a meaningful manner. And obviously, if you're listening to someone, you have to listen positively as well. And when you get a chance to speak, or you only then you should obviously interrupt someone or speak about it. It helps participants to conclude their conversation effectively, satisfactorily, with mutual understanding and agreement. Yes, you not just try to dominate someone. You normally sometimes it happens in order to have a conversational control. You need to also have some sort of understanding and agreement with the other person. It's not like that. Control here doesn't mean that you are dominating someone. It has to do with, you can say, taking corrective action, or you can say it's more of taking corrective action, or you can say controlling your thoughts and emotions and other things, and have you can say a major contribution in the conversation. For that, you are not just obviously speaking or listening all the time. You take turns when you are communicating orally. So if you are speaking, you need to speak about positive things, relevant things, timely things, right? And if you're listening, you need to obviously give support to the other person. We will discuss about it later on, for what are those important things which are required for oral communication, for successful oral communication. And obviously you should reach some sort of understanding and agreement if we are talking about conversational control. Right. Now, the other thing about conversational control is where it is obviously applied in business. Where do you will find the skills for obviously it's a sort of a skill that you have a conversational control. So where what are those examples where we can use them, or you can say where it is normally required that you should have some sort of conversational control skills uh, with you, right? For example, when you are selling or buying something, negotiating, exactly in negotiation, because when we are trying to dominate the other party, or gain something out of the conversation, there it is required that you should have conversational control. You should be able to influence others. You should be able to argue about things and ideas. So there, your conversation control skills can be quite helpful. During the interview, obviously, sometimes you are an interviewer, sometimes you become an interviewee. So there as well, this skill is utilized. It can obviously give you a lot of benefits when you're participating in meetings, right? uh, Here you need to also understand one thing, that if we are having some disagreements, we should not be try to be rude or harsh towards people, but we need to explain our point of view in a proper manner, in a proper way, so that even if we are disagreeing, we should obviously not disrespect the other person, right? This is part of your conversation control skills. um, Sometimes people are also involved in protests, right? Protesting about things which they do not agree to someone, right? So again, as I mentioned earlier, we are not we should not try to be rude, or we should not try to be offensive or hurt the feelings of others. We should try to use those terms in the conversation which are not biased and discriminatory, right? We should not have some sort of prejudice against other people, and so on. Right. One thing about conversation control is you can sometimes compliment someone or praise, appreciate someone as well, so that the communication goes on successfully. Right. And you need to be also be able to respond to personal criticism, right? uh, Criticism doesn't have doesn't mean that the other person will always be negative towards you. Positive criticism can also be can also happen, and that can only happen when you are not being obviously rude to others or offend others, right? Or not biased or discriminatory towards others. We move on to the next thing. Conversational control skills are useful when you are interacting with people in meetings in a convincing way, exactly, and handling objections to a proposal. Of course, a proposal is just you can say when an idea is presented in front of you, when people come up with some sort of you can say project or idea which they want to do, and obviously if you are trying to propose something to someone, and if the other person obviously disallows that your proposal is not accepted, you need to obviously be intelligent to handle the to the matters. You should take it seriously, but you should try to handle it properly. Being able to react to criticism in a confident manner, obviously these are some of the skills required for conversational control, developing skills in interviewing. All these things will be also discussed afterwards. Today is just the second class, so when we come to employment communication, there as well we can discuss about this conversational control, because interviewing is one of the topics which we have to discuss later on. Learning how to get correct information quickly. So all these things can be handled properly or managed properly if you possess good skills of conversational control. Some of the techniques of conversational control are obviously, if you are a listener, you should, whether you are a speaker or a listener, you should be able to recognize inference or infer cues, hints, or clues of the other person, the expressions and other things. Exactly, this is important technique, and all these techniques can be learned as well. But the more you are involved in conversation with others, the more involved you are in oral communication, face-to-face communication, you develop these skills of conversational control. You should be able to interpret signs and signals when you are in conversation control. You should obviously try to speak or communicate orally in a sequential manner, in a logical manner, in a in an organized way, right? The fourth point, using reflection and empathy, will be soon discussed after this slide, because this is these two you can say points are really important for oral communication. So we will discuss about this soon. Cultivate a sense of time. Right? Then we move on to the next slide. As written over here, two sides of effective oral communication. This is the most important topic of you can say oral communication, which is also important for exams. There are two sides of effective oral communication. If you want to effectively do oral communication, obviously these are the two things you need to remember. The first one is reflection. So what is reflection, we will just discuss, but there are two sides of effective oral communication, and as I said, you need to obviously pay attention to this topic, because this topic is quite popular in the exams as well. The first side of effective oral communication is reflection. What is this reflection? Now, you must have heard this word many times in your life. Reflection, for example, sometimes people consider reflection as giving some sort of response, or you can say feedback about situations, about things. Yes, that is one of the meaning of reflection. That is obviously when someone is or you can say a sort of a review, when you give a review, or when you obviously provide your own about provide information about your own thoughts and feelings. That can also be part of reflection. But as far as the oral communication is concerned, reflection means that it's a process of examining and interpreting experience to gain new understanding. That's the process of examining and interpreting experience to gain new understanding. It means when someone is speaking in front of you, you should be able to obviously support the speaker by using this technique of reflection. It combines paraphrasing and asking questions in restating both the feelings and words of the speaker. You must have noticed sometimes that when someone is speaking in front of you, sometimes it happens that you try to support them by giving positive feedback, or sometimes you provide not just always verbally, but sometimes non-verbally as well. You nod your head, or you try to give signal to the speaker that you are comfortable with whatever is being said in front of you, and you can understand the speaker properly by nodding your head or by using some of the other gesture. That is also part of reflection. But here reflection means that paraphrasing or asking questions in a timely and in a proper manner, and obviously your job as a listener is to convey to the speaker that you can easily understand what the speaker words are and what the feelings, how the speaker is feeling, and you can also make the speaker understand. You can also understand what the speakers of the feelings are. For example, sometimes it happens that when the students are giving presentations in the classroom, there are some people obviously who are sitting at the back of the class. They try to disturb the presenter, and by confusing them or disturbing them or giving some sort of signals or using some of the comments which can obviously distract the presenter or insult the presenter. So these are not good ways of providing reflection, right? But what we need to do is we need to allow the speaker to hear back their own thoughts and focus on what they feel and say. How can that be done? Sometimes you respond by commenting on what the speaker has said, and sometimes you use some signals or signs or gestures to provide this speaker some hints that you can easily understand the speaker. Demonstrates to the speaker that the listener is trying to perceive the topic as they see it, and that the listener is doing his best to understand his messages. It's very important for the speaker to realize that whatever he or she is speaking, the listener is comfortable with it, is able to understand the speaker as well. And that can only happen if the listener gives a proper feedback, verbally or non-verbally. Right, encourages the speaker to continue talking. So this is just you can say a description what reflection is, but how reflection should be done, how reflection exactly should be done, will be mentioned in the next slide. We come to the next slide. There are two main techniques of reflecting during the oral communication, and that has to do with normally the listener has to employ these two techniques whenever he or she is trying to reflect. Obviously, the first one is mirroring. What is this mirroring? It's a form of reflecting or reflection, and it involves repeating almost exactly what the speaker says. So sometimes it happens that that when the speaker has said something, in order to make the speaker understand that you can, in order to give speak a hint that you have understood what the speaker has said, you try to use the same words of the speaker by quoting, or by, you can say, by using some of the keywords or repeating the keywords or the last few words of what the speaker has said in front of you. So in this way you can tell the speaker as that you have perfectly understood what the speaker was saying. It acts like a mirror. For example, when you see yourself in a mirror, obviously you see your reflection. So the listener, through his actions and through his words, should become a reflection for the speaker, and that can only be done by just using some of the keywords which the speaker has used during the conversation, to give us to support them, to motivate them or encourage them to speak further. So mirroring is one of the technique. The other technique is paraphrasing. Here you're not exactly repeating the same words of what the speaker has said, but you use your own words, but you use the same concepts or ideas which the speaker has mentioned earlier. So paraphrasing is also one of the technique where it is different from mirroring. Mirroring is repeating exactly the same words, but in paraphrasing, what you do, you obviously use your own words, but you talk about the same concept. And in this way, as well, the speaker will realize that you have understood what the speaker was saying. So paraphrasing involves using other words to reflect what the speaker has said. Attempts to understand the speaker. When paraphrasing, you should try to avoid assumptions, stereotyping, and prejudices. Exactly, stereotyping is not allowed, as we discussed about the stereotyping in the courtesy concept yesterday. So we should avoid stereotyping people or groups uh, or you can say uh, nations. We should try not to. We should avoid assumptions, right? And give enough time to the speaker to complete what he or she is trying to convey or say, and then use your own words so that the speaker will realize, okay, you have understood it. One should not introduce his or her own ideas or question the speaker thoughts, feelings, or actions. So when paraphrasing, one thing is very important, that you should not try to introduce your own ideas or try to question what the speaker thoughts, feelings, and actions are. So these two techniques can be used for reflection. So in short, you can say, to summarize, we can say that reflection is a technique which allows the speaker to speak further. It encourages the speaker, it motivates the speaker, and that can be done by two techniques, mirroring and paraphrasing. And this mirroring is when you are repeating exactly the same words of the speaker. In this way, it can motivate the speaker to go further. And paraphrasing here, which it is different from mirroring in the sense that here you are not repeating the exact words of the speaker, but you are using your own words to convey these your ideas that the speak that you have understood the speaker properly. So these are two of the techniques. This is just one side of the oral communication. The other side has to do with empathy, which you can see in the next slide. Empathy. The first is reflection. The other thing is empathy. Both these two things are really important for successful oral communication, remember, or for conversational control as well. So empathy, what is empathy? I simply, you can understand by empathy is that it's being sensitive about situations. Empathy is different from sympathy. In sympathy, you are trying to be generous or kind towards others, right? You are sympathizing with someone. But in empathy, here you are trying to understand the emotions and feelings of the speaker, of the other person, and you try to be sensitive about situations. For example, here for example, if you take an example of funeral, when we go to attend a funeral, you can see that the relatives of the deceased, or the people the people who are mourning, the relatives of the deceased, or the person who has died in the and who's obviously you are attending the funeral. So there you can say the situation is serious, and obviously people are sad over there. And if you go over there and you are trying to share jokes with them, or trying to, you can say, trying to be happy, or by showing by using some of the words or expressions which where the other people feel that you are trying to be happy, the situation is of sadness, the situation is of mourning. So there you cannot be happy, or you are sharing jokes with people, right? Or you have so it means that yeah, so it means it's against the empathy rules. So in empathy, if you want to empathize with someone, obviously you need to be sensitive about the situation, and you should try to be serious over there. You should not try to talk about or gossip around with people. And you should not talk about politics or other things, because the situation is of mourning and sadness. So there, it's better not to be happy over there, right? Through your expressions or through your words, you cannot actually tell the other people or the relatives of the other people that you are feeling very happy about it. So, if you want to empathize with them, obviously you realize that they are facing a sort of problem or sadness, or obviously, and you try to support them by being serious over there. So it shows that you empathize with them easily. So as I said, it's different from sympathy. And sympathy, obviously, you are trying to be kind, but in empathy, you are aware of the situation and you act accordingly. So obviously, this is empathy. And if we just read the description over here, empathy refers to being able to put oneself in someone else's shoes and realize how they feel. And it talks about viewing state of affairs from another person's perspective and being sensitive about situations. So as I said, okay, when you are having a conversation with people, when you are involved in oral communication, so you need to make the speaker realize that you are empathizing with the speaker, you want to support the speaker. Earlier, I gave an example of students' presentations. So if those students who are sitting at the back of the class realize that the presenter or the student who is giving a presentation is confused and he obviously is trying to convey his ideas and trying to give a presentation, if they realize that the other person may be nervous, so realizing all these things and supporting the speaker means that you are trying to empathize with the speaker. So you, as a listener, as a oral communicator, not just involved in reflection process, but you should also be able to empathize with the people who are involved in oral communication. So this is what obviously is an important topic. These two main techniques or you can say two sides of effective oral communication. One is reflection, the other is empathy. Questions can come in the exams about these two topics. Next, we come to effective listening. Obviously, we have already discussed about the oral communication. So just to end our discussion about oral communication, we can obviously focus some of the important things regarding listening. Obviously, listening is quite important, especially when you are involved in oral communication. So it's more important, obviously, than speaking, in the sense, okay, when someone is speaking, you need to respect the other person, you need to obviously show empathy to them, you need to also sometimes reflect what the speaker has said. Sometimes you need to be to be silent, and you should be attentive, you should try to encourage or support or encourage or motivate the other person, obviously the speaker. So listening is quite it's a process, obviously a process of, it's part of communication, right? It's one of these skill which is you can say a receptive skill, where you're receiving information, where you are taking information from the speaker. So some of the things which are given over here about effective listening can be discussed. And here it is written: listening is the process of actively and effectively decoding and interpreting verbal messages. Exactly. Not just verbal messages, but also non-verbal messages. So it's a process of actively and effectively decoding. Decoding means understanding, and also not just understanding. You need to also interpret the verbal message or the non-verbal messages which are presented in front of you. Process of recognition of sounds and voices with attentiveness and willingness. Exactly. Good listening skills can be acquired by practice and discipline. Again, this is a skill which can be developed with the passage of time, gradually. If you want to become an effective listener, you should listen to people to attentively, right, effectively, and you should try to be patient. You should try to respect the ideas and feelings of others. You should try to obviously speak when you are given a chance to speak. So uh, one of the most important skill in communication is listening. Obviously, the other three skills are speaking, writing, and reading. But listening, you can say, is one of the skill which is, you can say, the percentage of the skill. The most common skill is listening. Obviously, most of the times we are listening rather than we are speaking. We listen. We give more time to speak listening than speaking. Right. So good listening skills can be acquired by practice and and discipline. As I said, it's a receptive skill. There are two receptive skills. One is listening, the other one is reading. In both the skills, you are receiving information, you are gaining information. And and obviously it adds to our knowledge and experiences. So this is just a short description about effective listening, which is one of the most important part of oral communication. Yeah. So now we can move on to our next topic. There are some other topics in this syllabus regarding oral communication. You can read about it in your from your books, especially if you're reading the ICM study text. You can find out some of uh, the more important topics over there. You can go through it, and if you're obviously there are other recommended reading books available. For example, Excellence in Business Communication. So you can get some notes from there as well. Now we come to the other major topic of the syllabus, that is interpersonal communication. Now this is quite an important topic because I've seen in the examination papers that some of the descriptive questions can be asked as far as interpersonal communication is concerned, and obviously um, uh, you can say that some MCQs can also be obviously be uh, available on the in the exam. So interpersonal communication, we have to start with it. It is also a type of oral communication mostly, and it also happens face to face most of the times. So what is interpersonal communication? We can just start by reading the slide over here. Interpersonal communication occurs at least between two people. Obviously, yeah. Well, communication can only happen when you are most of the times you are communicating with other people. So at least two people should be involved in interpersonal communication. Yes, interpersonal communication can happen with more than two people as well, but at least two people should be available. It may be verbal, non-verbal, wordless, and it can be done through imitation as well. Right. Interpersonal communication occurs between two or more people who have established relationships. This is one of the definitions of interpersonal communication. You can get many definitions of interpersonal communication from various sources, but I think that this is quite an effective definition here. It is talking about a process of communication which is occurring between two or at least two people or more people who have established relationships. Now, this point, established relationships, needs to be emphasized later on. Obviously, that's the most important, one of the most important points as far as interpersonal communication is concerned. It is sometimes done to establish relationships. So it means that the relationships of the speaker and the listeners are already defined in interpersonal communication sometimes, and sometimes the people are involved in interpersonal communication to establish relationships. Some of the examples of interpersonal communication can be, for example, meetings can be considered as one of the example where you are communicating with the other person interpersonally, and you are having a face-to-face communication. Oral communication is happening over there. So meetings is one example. Interviewing is another example, where again two people are involved in the communication, and they sometimes change their roles as well as a speaker and listeners. So obviously, both in interpersonal communication, you take turns. Obviously, you sometimes become a speaker, sometimes you become a listener. So obviously, uh, interviewing is an example of interpersonal communication. Group communication or group discussion is one of the example of interpersonal communication. Meetings can be another example of interpersonal communication, and so on. And it is sometimes done to establish relationships. So people just are involved in interpersonal communication to in order to have some sort of relationships, right? So that can be also discussed later. We will discuss today about all these things, what type of relationships we are talking about, and how these relationships can be improved. Exactly. So now we come to the next thing. That is the purpose of interpersonal communication. As I was given examples of meetings, interviews, and of a group discussion or group communication. So you can see over here that these are some of the purposes of interpersonal communication. Actually, these are the major purposes of interpersonal communication. And you can say, broadly speaking, we can consider these five purposes as actually the the purposes of interpersonal communication. So there are only five major purposes of interpersonal communication. For example, the first one is to learn. Now, to learn here can consist of, for example, you are involved in interpersonal communication to learn about something. You share information, you exchange information, you try to inform the other people about something. So one of the major purpose of interpersonal communication is to learn about people and things and ideas. Exactly. So one of the most important example of interpersonal communication can be communication between friends. Now this is obviously more informal, not formal, but in order to understand interpersonal communication, you can think about what kind of communication friends do with each other, right? One of the purpose they are obviously communicating with each other is when they want to learn about something, about new information or about some information which is already available, right? So to learn, you can also use some of the other terms instead of learning, for example, sharing or informing. The other purpose of interpersonal communication can be to influence. Actually, the communication between friends can be considered as one of the best examples of interpersonal communication. If you have friends and you are communicating with them, you can easily understand these five purposes, right? To influence. Now, again, this is a generalized term. Influence can mean that you are trying to obviously persuade the other person to accept your point of view. Sometimes influence can be positive, sometimes it can be negative. In all, when you're trying to convince others, when you're trying to encourage people, when you're trying to motivate them, when you're trying to argue with them, the purpose of influence, obviously this purpose is obviously used. So or for example, when you are negotiating with people, you're trying to influence others, right? When you are obviously having a meeting with people, when you're obviously a part of the meeting, you are trying to influence others, right? So these are some of the examples where interpersonal communication is used to influence others. To relate, obviously, whenever people are involved in interpersonal communication, some type of relationship happens, right? Some form of relationship occurs. So not only that, some relationships can established, but sometimes people already have the relationships with each other and they know about it already, right? We will talk about this purpose later on, because this is one of the major things regarding interpersonal communication. To play, obviously, to play means to share jokes, to for entertainment purposes. We are obviously involved in interpersonal communication, right? And to help, exactly, this is the fifth purpose of interpersonal communication. It is also one of the important purposes of interpersonal communication. So people normally communicate with each other interpersonally, face to face or orally, to help each other, right? To support them, to provide some sort of benefit to the others. So this it can also be one of the purposes of interpersonal communication. Actually, the communication can have various purposes, but if you especially talk about interpersonal communication, these five purposes can be focused. And as I said, you can easily understand these five purposes if you have friends and you're communicating with them, because this is one of the best examples of interpersonal communication. The other examples, as I said, can be meetings or interviewing, or, for example, group discussions. Now, we come to the first thing about interpersonal communication. We have to discuss about some of the elements. In order to understand interpersonal communication, we should also understand these elements. So, in order to obviously effectively understand what interpersonal communication is, we have to talk about these elements. Now, first thing which is written over here is meanings are not in words; they are in people. Now, I've read about this somewhere, and I like this you can say statement which is used over here. That's why I'm using it for interpersonal communication. In order to explain you what interpersonal communication is, you can just read this phrase, or you can say expression. Meanings are not in words; they are in people. What does it mean? Now, you can so obviously people just think about it कि भाई, when we are using words, obviously words have meanings, so words should convey meanings to the other person as well. But as I said over here, it's written over here that normally meanings are normally in people, not in words. Now what it means, it has to do with intrapersonal communication first of all. So, in order to effectively communicate interpersonally, you should first of all understand what is intrapersonal communication or intrapersonal thinking. So, to discuss about this first element, this is the most important element of interpersonal communication. As I said, all these elements have to be understood, because in order to understand interpersonal communication, in order to effectively use interpersonal communication skills, you should be aware of these important elements as well. So the first thing is intrapersonal communication. Interpersonal communication cannot happen without intrapersonal communication. What is intrapersonal communication? Now, if we talk about interpersonal communication, it happens between people, right? One person is communicating with the other person, but intrapersonal is the communication within oneself. And obviously, where the communication happens, obviously in your mind. When you are thinking about something, it involves thinking process, it involves cognition process. So interpersonal communication is the communication within. Interpersonal communication is communication between people, face-to-face communication, oral communication. But intrapersonal communication, obviously we are communicating with ourselves 24 hours a day. We communicate all the time with ourselves. Exactly, whatever you are saying, whatever you are speaking, whatever you're thinking about something, you are also actually hearing about it internally, right? You can understand, obviously, what this means. Thinking process, not just what you think, but it also involves how you are thinking about something, is also part of intrapersonal communication. Now, if we move on, what intrapersonal communication consists of. In order to understand intrapersonal communication, you have to understand the other things as well associated with it. Now, as I said, the intra means communication within, and inter means communication between people. Now, intrapersonal communication involves the concept about self. Your self concept is one of the major things. In order to understand intrapersonal communication, you should be able to also understand this concept of self. What is this self concept? Now, for example, if you look at yourself in the mirror, you will see your reflection in it, obviously, right? And you should have you can say a positive opinion about yourself. First of all, that has to do with your self concept. Whatever you are, whoever you are, obviously is part of your self concept. And if you obviously are positive about it, if you like what you are, obviously that is good for intrapersonal communication as well, because you will be positive about yourself, you will be motivated to do many things in your life, and you should respect and it also one important thing about self-concept is your self-respect and your self-esteem. Actually, both these things, self-respect and self-esteem, is part of your self-concept, right? Which is, as I said, is part of your intrapersonal communication. Now, what is the self-respect and self-esteem? Now, in order to understand what self-esteem is, it has to do with your ego. Uh, we normally use this term self-esteem when we talk about ego. What this ego is. To explain you through an example, for example, if you look at the classroom, in your classrooms, there are people who have got high self-esteem, and there are some people who have got low self-esteem. And normally teachers can take notice of these two things. For example, when the teacher is teaching or giving a lecture in the classroom, the teacher has a fair bit of understanding and idea. There are some students who have got higher self-esteem, some of them have lower self-esteem. For example, those students who are participating more in the class, the teacher assumes that they are having higher self-esteem than the rest of the other students. As human beings, we always try to compare and contrast. Obviously, we are always comparing ourselves with other people, and there are some students who are not participating in the class. They think that obviously they are not very intelligent, or they do not have understanding about the topic which is being discussed discussed by the teacher. So there is a chance that they can lower their self-esteem for the time being. The self-esteem can change from situation to situation, right? For example, if I say that this ego and self-esteem, in order to understand it further, you can just rate yourself on the scale of 1 to 10. For example, all human beings, for example, all of us, normally what we do, we rate ourselves and compare ourselves with the other people. And we rate ourselves on the scale of 1 to 10. For example, how good you are as a husband, or how good you are as a student, or how good you are as a son, as a father, as a husband, or and so on, as an important member of the society. So this adds up to your self-esteem. You may have noticed that sometimes people have a higher self-esteem outside the home, but they may have a lower self-esteem inside, right? It also happens that self-esteem can be different according to person. If you look at your siblings, some of them will feel, you may have noticed that some of them are very confident when they're communicating with others, so it means that they have a higher self-esteem about themselves, right? And there are some siblings, your siblings, who are always quiet. They are not obviously speaking. They are obviously sitting in a corner, not talking much with the people, not communicating much with the other people. So there is a possibility that at that time their self-esteem is lower. So this self-esteem adds up to your how you respect yourself, how you compare yourself as far as the people around you are concerned, as far as the situations around you are concerned, and this adds up to your self-concept, right? And which is also part of intrapersonal communication. So it has to do with whatever you are thinking about yourself. So it involves your thinking process. This is part of your intrapersonal communication. The other thing about interpersonal communication is there can also be types of self. There are three types of self concepts. For example, one type is known as real self. What this real self is, only you know, or you can say your Allah Almighty knows about who you are actually. So this is your real self, and that it obviously only that individual obviously who is any person. Normally, people do not know about who you are really. Only you yourself as a person knows about it, right? So this is your real self. Ideal self has to do with what you want to become. There are some people obviously which we follow them, we try to be like them, we try to idealize them. So that is ideal self, right? So real is different from the real self. Real self is the actual self which you are, which you have inside you. But ideal self is what we are trying to be like someone else. For example, we follow a lot of celebrities or sports people or people who are famous. Sometimes people try to idealize them. So that is what ideal self is. And public self is how you want to how you come in front of the other people. That is public self. So there can be some types of self concepts, right? And these all three concepts belong to the only you know about it. One is the real self, obviously, which you normally know what you are. And ideal self is what you want to become, and public self is actually how you are coming in front of the other people. So all these things obviously are important for understanding intrapersonal communication as well. Now, types of intrapersonal communication. By the way, obviously we are discussing about interpersonal communication, right? And this intrapersonal communication is part of intrapersonal communication. This is one of the most important elements. So what you think about yourself, what kind of communication you are doing with yourself, is part of interpersonal communication which you do with other people. Now, the types of intrapersonal communication, there can be some of the types. For example, one is internal. Yes, anyone wants to speak about something? One is internal. Uh, Internal communication, as we have already discussed, that intrapersonal communication is internal. You cannot, and that is always done 24 hours a day. Even when we are sleeping, we are also involved in intrapersonal communication, because we are thinking all the time, and in dreams as well. We are obviously having we are communicating with us. So that's internal. Vocal intrapersonal communication can be sometimes when nobody is around you and you are talking loudly. Uh, because internal communication happens, interpersonal communication happens when silently, right? Only you know what you are thinking, only you know what your beliefs and feelings are. Obviously, only you know about yourself. So that is silent intrapersonal communication. One is vocal. The vocal is where you are speaking loudly, but nobody is around you. This happens normally when they are trying to sing, about when they're singing sometimes, or when for example, when we are in a washroom, sometimes we are speaking to ourselves, we are looking at ourselves in the mirror, and we are speaking about things. But this again it's just a type of intrapersonal communication, because you yourself know what you have said or what you are speaking about. Nobody is around you, nobody is looking at you, and you do sometimes intrapersonal communication silently, and sometimes you are vocal about it. There is one thing about interpersonal communication. There is one type which has to do with personal writing as well. Now, normally intrapersonal communication is oral communication. Exactly, you are speaking and listening, right, internally. But sometimes intrapersonal communication can be in the written form. And the best example of personal writing is when people are maintaining diaries. You must have heard about what diaries are. Normally, people maintain diaries. They write about important things. They schedule important appointments and other things, and they record whatever has happened throughout the day. But that is quite personal. They keep it safely. They keep and they lock it in their drawers or cupboards, right? So that can be a form of intrapersonal communication, because you're not sharing with anyone else. So that is one type of intrapersonal communication. But normally intrapersonal communication is oral communication, and you are yourself involved in it. It is an internal communication. Nobody knows about it, what you are thinking about, what are your emotions and feelings. So this is one of the most important elements of interpersonal communication, because actually we are discussing about interpersonal communication. Now we come to the second element, which is important, and that is one is intrapersonal. The second one is the frames of references. Not just that we are involved in intrapersonal communication, but at the time when we are also communicating interpersonally with other people, our frames of reference should also be considered as an important aspect of interpersonal communication. What these frames of references are. Well, for example, for what is the meaning of frames? Frames can be regarded as parts or portions. Now, if you just imagine that your mind or your memory has a lot of divisions or a lot of frames, just assuming, obviously you have other things. Obviously we are just assuming that you have got some pockets or some parts or some frames in your mind, and you store information of all sorts, of all types in your mind. These frames of references, it includes your worldview, whatever you have learned, whatever knowledge, whatever experiences, your emotions, your feelings, your beliefs, your ideologies, your attitudes, whatever you have, you're stored in your brain, in your mind. The overall worldview about or the knowledge about it are regarded as frames of references. So not, and again, it is part of intrapersonal communication as well. So the first element, intrapersonal communication, and also frames of references, normally you know about it. As I said, this includes your feelings, emotions, your knowledge, your beliefs, your ideologies, your attitudes, your value system, your culture. All the information about it is stored in your mind, and obviously it's different from the other individuals. So when you're communicating interpersonally, you are trying to share all these things with the other person. So this is the second element of interpersonal communication. The third element for interpersonal communication is your verbal communication. Exactly, when you are communicating with the other person, you have to use words or signs or symbols, obviously, and the discrete terms, the definite and precise terms when you're communicating verbally. Exactly, verbal communication is part of interpersonal communication. This is how you communicate with other people, right? And non-verbal is, again, obviously when verbal communication happens, non-verbal communication will also happen. Exactly, as I said, interpersonal communication is oral communication, face-to-face communication, right, person-to-person communication. So not just whatever you are speaking about can be noticed by the other person, but also the gestures and the movements you are doing, or the actions you are actually using, or the all patterns of your behavior can be noticed by the other person. This is one of the element of interpersonal communication. And the last element of interpersonal communication are the events and situations. Exactly, interpersonal communication will change according to the situation, according to the events. This event point will be discussed later on today as well. We will discuss what kind of events we are talking about. But interpersonal communication changes according changes when the event or the situation or the context of communication changes. So this can be one of the element of interpersonal communication. All these elements, intrapersonal communication, frames or references, verbal communication, non-verbal communication, and events and situations are interdependent, by the way, and all of them work together for successful interpersonal communication, which you do with the other people. Now, what else we need to discuss in interpersonal communication? We have discussed already about elements. We have also discussed about the purposes of interpersonal communication. Now we have to discuss two more things in this topic. The important topics regarding interpersonal communication are the axioms of interpersonal communication and also the universals of interpersonal communication. So we will discuss now about it. Next slide has to do with axioms of interpersonal communication. What is the meaning of axiom? Axiom means the principles, you can say, or the rules. When you are involved in interpersonal communication, you have to obviously follow these axioms. You should be aware of these axioms all the time. Now, what this is, as I said, interpersonal communication examples are when you are involved in communication or having conversation during the meetings or interviewing or group discussion, or when you're talking to your friends. Obviously, these are all examples of interpersonal communication. So as the participants of communication, you should be aware of these rules and principles. As I said, this is oral communication. This is mostly face-to-face communication. So the participants should be aware of these axioms as well. The first thing about interpersonal communication is it is transactional communication. Now, what this transactional means? Look, communication can be of many types. One communication type can be regarded as one-way communication, or you can say lateral communication, where you are the speaker and the other people are just listening. You have taken a role of a speaker all the time, right? And all the audience members, all the people who are just listening to you, they are listeners. So this is one-way communication. And sometimes this kind of communication happens in classroom, where the teacher is giving a lecture and the students are just listening all the time. The other type of communication can be computer mediated communication, where you are using some mechanical device, some electronic device for communicating with other people. One more type of communication can be regarded as interactional communication or interactive communication, where you take turns whenever you are speaking. You take turns. For example, first you speak, then you allow the other person to speak. First you speak for some time, and then you stop, and the other person is the listener, and afterwards the listener becomes the speaker, and then you become the listener. So you take turns. It's timely. It follows the concept of turn taking. So that is interactional communication. But what is transactional communication? Transactional communication is more than interactional communication. Actually, it's a type of interactional communication. What this is that is in interpersonal communication, you switch roles of speaker and listeners all the time, and it is not obviously that you will wait for the speaker to complete what he or she is saying. You may interrupt at any time you want. As I said, the best example of interpersonal communication is communication between friends. So if you notice the friends, how they communicate, they are not obviously trying to give enough time to the other person as well. They change roles quickly. They switch roles quickly. Both the parties who are involved in interpersonal communication, they are simultaneously a speaker and the listener, right? So one meaning of transactional is this. The other meaning of transactional is that you are the speaker and listener both. All the participants who are involved in interpersonal communication, they are speakers and listeners simultaneously, in the sense that even if you are speaking about something to someone, the other person is listening, you are speaking, but you are also listening to yourself. You are also involved in intrapersonal communication which happens within you. So you are not just a speaker at that moment, you are also a listener, because you can hear whatever you are speaking to the other person. So, and same is the case with listeners. Listeners are not just listeners, they are also speakers, because whatever information they are receiving from the speaker, how will they understand it? Obviously they will speak that particular whatever the speaker has said, they will speak to themselves and they will have to listen to themselves even. So they're not just listeners of the between the people, but they're also speaking to themselves in order to understand what the speaker has said. So this is what it means of being transactional communication. So transactional communication is you are a speaker and listener simultaneously. That is, you are not although you are involved in interaction with the other person, but here there is no, you can say, set policy or rule that you have to be a speaker or you have to be a listener when you are taking turns or by taking turns, but you are actually a simultaneous speaker and listener both in interpersonal communication. And as I have already explained that you are, if you are the speaker, you will be speaking to the listener or to the other person, but you're also listening as well at the moment when you're speaking, and you will be listening, not just the listener. And similarly, the listener will not just be a listener. The listener has to speak whatever information you have given to the other person. So the listener has to speak in order to understand what you have said. So that is, it means transactional means this. Next thing about the next axiom, or you can say principle of interpersonal communication, is interpersonal elements are interdependent. All these elements which we have discussed earlier, uh, you know, for example, intrapersonal communication, the self concept, the frames of references, events, verbal communication, non-verbal communication, situations, concepts, all these elements are interdependent, means they are dependent on each other. Means if one of the element changes, it will have an effect on the other elements, and the other elements will also change. So this is what it means to be interdependent, right? If any of the element changes, obviously the communication will change and all the elements will change as well. So interdependence means this. So these are the two axioms. Interpersonal communication is transactional. The other axiom is interdependent. We come to the third axiom, that is interpersonal communication is ambiguous. Now, if what is the meaning of ambiguity? Ambiguity or being ambiguous. Ambiguous means they're having more than one meaning. Whatever you are speaking, whatever you are sharing information, that information can be ambiguous. By the way, according to what I feel is language is ambiguous, right? So in order to understand what the other person has said, we need to share the same system or same language system in order to understand what the other person is saying. So ambiguity, we have to eliminate ambiguity. We avoid ambiguity, and that can only be done by understanding, by sharing the same system or language. To give you an example of ambiguity, uh, for example, if I say like this, that fighting elephants is dangerous for a man. Now, I'm just giving an example here. Fighting elephants is dangerous for a man. Now, this sentence have two meanings at least. One meaning is, if you fight with elephants, obviously it's quite dangerous. You cannot fight with elephants. This is one meaning. The other meaning can be that when you see the elephants who are fighting, if they are fighting with each other, you should not be there. So this is the second meaning. So ambiguity, or you can say being ambiguous, means that having more than one meaning. This meaning can be positive, negative, both. So if we when we are speaking to people, when we are listening to them, if through the context, through the you can say co-text or context, if we cannot understand the situation, what is the meaning of that particular sentence, obviously then the meaning then the meaning will change obviously for us. So the speaker should try to use certain words or terminologies which the listener can be able to understand, not just use those words, but also try to explain from the context what you actually mean. So this happens a lot at times in interpersonal communication, that the language becomes ambiguous. Why? Because people sometimes cannot understand the same, they are not using the same system, or they are not using the same language. What we do is, in order to eliminate this thing of ambiguity, right, in order to avoid being ambiguous, we try to use communication accommodation theory or adjustment theory. Now, there is one theory which is known as communication accommodation or communication adjustment theory. What this is, look, and why do we actually use communication accommodation or adjustment theory? In order to obviously have social approval of some sort. Now, to give you an example, if you notice, normally the boys knows about this, that normally sometimes when we go outside our homes, we visit at many places. We normally visit at we go and meet with many people. For example, if you go to a dhaba, or you can say a restaurant where you can go for taking tea, for example, there you will notice that sometimes we change our accent and style when we are communicating with the person who is serving us the tea. We try to change our accent and style so that the other person can understand what we are saying. So this is what communication accommodation theory is, that we try to adjust, we try to accommodate so that the other person can easily understand what we say. हम अपना लहजा चेंज कर लेते हैं, हम अपना अंदाज चेंज कर लेते हैं लोगों से बात करते हैं. सो इसको हम कहते हैं कम्युनिकेशन अकोमोडेशन थ्योरी. वो हम क्यों करते हैं? वो इसलिए ताकि दूसरे बंदे को ऐसा फील हो कि हमें भी उनका अंदाज पता है, हमें भी जो है हम ये रियलाइज कराना चाहते हैं उनको कि हम जो भी बात करना चाह रहे हैं, so that they can also understand it. And this is how you receive your social approval. So as I said, whenever you're communicating with the other person, especially when you are doing it face to face, there's a chance that you can be ambiguous. Your sentences, your statements can have more than one meaning, and in order to avoid having ambiguity, we try to accommodate our communication style, our communication accent, and we try to use that particular language which the other person can understand, and so on. So this is what communication accommodation theory has to do with, and this is one of the important axioms of interpersonal communication. Why? Because, as I said, you are having face-to-face communication, and at that moment, in order to have successful communication, effective communication, you need to employ all these techniques so that ambiguity can be eliminated. Now, the fourth axiom of interpersonal communication is, as far as interpersonal communication is concerned, relationships are symmetrical or complementary. Now, what this means, as I said earlier, interpersonal communication is communication which happens between two people who have established relationships. I was discussing about this definition earlier, and sometimes it is done to establish relationships. So it means that already the participants in the communication of when you are involved in interpersonal communication, they know what their relationship status is. Both the parties know about it. And sometimes when you are communicating interpersonally, you try to obviously have social approval, and sometimes at that moment the relationships can change. But what type of relationships are actually happening in interpersonal communication? There are only two types of relationships which occur whenever we are having interpersonal communication. Although maybe this relationship is already established, or sometimes during communication this relationship can be established, right? So the first one is symmetrical relationship. This symmetrical relationship, the best example for symmetrical relationship is the communication between friends. You know, friends mirror each other. They consider each other as equal, right? And if one person tries to dominate the other person in the communication, obviously that cannot happen, because friends know that they have the same or equal relationship or symmetrical relationship with them, right? So obviously one cannot influence the other person easily, right? जैसे मिसाल तौर पर अगर आप अपने दोस्त को कुछ आप कोई ऑर्डर देंगे या कोई इंस्ट्रक्शंस देंगे, तो हो सकता है आपका दोस्त पॉजिटिवली रिस्पांस ना दे, क्योंकि वो कहेगा भाई द स्टेटस इज इक्वल, दे बिकॉज the relationship is at the equal status. So they will not obviously allow you to dominate the communication, or allow you to, for example, dominate the communication, or allow you to, for example, influence them. So this relationship is known as symmetrical relationship. The other type of relationship is complementary relationship. And as I said कि ये जो relationship है, ये कभी-कभी जो है बनती भी है और कभी-कभी ऑलरेडी एस्टेब्लिश्ड रहती है. जैसे मिसाल पे कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री रिलेशनशिप की अगर बात करें, ऑब्वियसली वो ऐसा है जैसा पेरेंट और चाइल्ड की रिलेशनशिप. जैसा आपके पेरेंट्स हैं, योर फादर एंड मदर, एंड तो आपकी और उनके बीच में जो रिलेशनशिप स्टेटस है वो कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री है, वो ऑपोजिट रिलेशनशिप है, राइट? सो ये नहीं हो सकता ऑब्वियसली दैट यू गिव योर पेरेंट्स कमांड्स और इंस्ट्रक्शंस और ऑर्डर्स. नॉर्मली योर पेरेंट्स आर मोर डोमिनेटिंग, they can easily influence you, they can order you, they can instruct you. So this type of relationship is known as complementary relationship. You can find, for example, if you talk about army, there the officer or the captain has full control in the in the communication, and the other, the soldiers, normal soldiers, they have to listen to the what the captain or the officer is telling them to do, right? So या आप एग्जांपल ले लीजिए टीचर और स्टूडेंट का एग्जांपल ले लीजिए. टीचर obviously has more dominating, more you can say authoritative role, more power than the other that the students have or the students possess. So ये पावर रिलेशनशिप्स हैं नॉर्मली, कि जब भी हम इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन करेंगे हमारी रिलेशनशिप या तो सिमेट्रिकल बनेगी या होगी पहले से, या फिर कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री रिलेशनशिप फॉर्म होगी, because it has to do with power and status which you have in the society. अच्छा, सिमेट्रिकल रिलेशनशिप जो कि इक्वल रिलेशनशिप है वो थोड़े से और दूसरे टाइप्स की भी हो सकती है. फॉर द टाइम बीइंग कभी कभी वो वन अप भी हो सकती है, वन डाउन भी हो सकती है, एंड समटाइम्स वन अक्रॉस भी हो सकती है. वन अप कम्युनिकेशन क्या होती है? वन अप सिमेट्रिकल रिलेशनशिप ये होती है कि जैसे मिसाल दोस्तों के अंदर कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि फॉर द मोमेंट, फॉर द टाइम बीइंग, कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि एक दोस्त को हावी होने देता है, राइट, डोमिनेट करने देता है फॉर द टाइम बीइंग. वैसे तो दोनों को अपनी रिलेशनशिप का पता होता है, दोनों को अपने स्टेटस का पता होता है, लेकिन फॉर सम रीजन जो है एक दोस्त दूसरे दोस्त को अगर थोड़ी देर के लिए अलाउ करे कि भाई वो कोई कोई अहम बात करे ताकि वो इन्फ्लुएंस कर सके या आर्ग्यू कर सके, तो वहां पे वो रिलेशनशिप हो जाती है वन अप फॉर द टाइमिंग, सिमेट्रिकल रिलेशनशिप. एक और होती है वन डाउन. वो ये होता है कि आप डेलिबरेटली दूसरे को हावी होने देते हैं अपने आप से. ये भी दोस्तों में कभी कभी होता है कि कोई आर्गुमेंट हो रहा है, कोई बहस चल रही है, तो आप बोलते हैं भाई इस आर्गुमेंट का एंड नहीं हो रहा, तो समटाइम्स होता ही है कि आप थोड़ी देर के लिए उसको कहते हैं भाई अच्छा आप जो कह रहे हैं वो सही कह रहे हैं. तो इसका मतलब यहाँ पे क्या है, ये वन डाउन सिमेट्रिकल रिलेशनशिप है. उसमें क्या हो रहा है, यू आर yielding, you are submitting your you can say your status or your authority or power for the time being. So this is one down. वन अक्रॉस क्या होता है, बिल्कुल एग्जैक्टली सेम लेवल की होती है, इक्वल होती है, उसको हम वन अक्रॉस रिलेशनशिप कहते हैं. तो सिमेट्रिकल तीन टाइप्स की हो सकते हैं, वन अप, वन डाउन एंड वन अक्रॉस, एंड दिस हैपेंस फॉर जस्ट few minutes, right? And normally both the participants in the interpersonal communication, they know about each other's relationship, each other's status. Now this thing, now obviously complementary के अंदर तो बिल्कुल opposite होता है. वहां पे मैंने आपको examples parent child या teacher student का दिया है. उसमें obviously जो है वहाँ पे ऑपोजिट रिलेशनशिप होती है. वहाँ पे एक पार्टी दूसरी पार्टी को डोमिनेट करती है, मोर अथॉरिटी होती है उसके पास, मोर पावर होती है, एलिवेटेड स्टेटस होता है उनका, उस वजह से वो कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री रिलेशनशिप होती है. तो दोनों चीजें हो सकती हैं. मिसाल के तौर पे व्हेन एवर यू आर कम्युनिकेटिंग इंटरपर्सनली, समटाइम्स रिलेशनशिप बनाई जाती है इस तरीके से बिकॉज ऑफ योर कम्युनिकेशन व्हाट यू डू. समटाइम्स जो है वो ऑलरेडी पार्टिसिपेंट्स को पता होता है कि वो उनकी आपस में क्या रिलेशनशिप है विद ईच अदर. सो व्हाटएवर द केस इज, इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन कैन सक्सेसफुली हैपन इफ यू आर अवेयर अबाउट the relationship status, right? And that can only be and obviously it will be helpful for you to communicate interpersonally if you know about your relationships with the other people. आप अगर देखें ग्रुप डिस्कशन में भी कभी कभी ऐसा होता है, समटाइम्स टीचर जो है जो स्टूडेंट्स को कोई ग्रुप डिस्कशन के लिए कोई टॉपिक देता है, तो स्टूडेंट्स जो है आप देखेंगे कि उसमें 4-5 स्टूडेंट्स ग्रुप में काम कर रहे हैं, तो फॉर सम रीजन एक आध बंदा उसको ग्रुप लीडर बना दिया जाता है या वो ग्रुप लीडर बन जाता है बिकॉज ऑफ हिज कम्युनिकेशन स्टाइल या कम्युनिकेशन या आइडियाज. तो the rest of the other people participants, what they do, although they are all of them are involved in interpersonal communication, but what they do for the time being उसको जो है कि higher status दे देते हैं. तो at that moment sometimes के जो है वो complementary relationship हो सकती है between the leader and the other followers or the group members. But mostly when the people who are communicating at the same level, they have symmetrical relationships as we have discussed. So right, so this is these are some of the four you can say interpersonal axioms. Now we come to the next one, That is, interpersonal communication has content and relationship dimensions. It's really important for the people who are involved in interpersonal communication to understand what this content and relationship dimension means. Now, whenever we are communicating, uh, there are two dimensions. The words and the sentences which we are using when we are communicating with the other person. All these words and sentences have two dimensions, or you can say two meanings. One meaning has to do with content. Obviously, whatever words and sentences you're using, that is what the content is. For example, if your boss tells you to, obviously, if the boss says, okay, I need a report to be submitted at my desk tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow at my desk. Now, this sentence has two dimensions. One is the content dimension. That is what this sentence means. The meaning is simple, that you as a subordinate have to submit the report tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp at the on the desk of the boss. एक तो ये content हो गया, लेकिन इसका एक relationship dimension भी है. वो ये है कि आपको पता है कि this is obviously, this command is given by the boss, so you need to obviously follow it. You need to accept it. You cannot say no to your boss. This is the relationship dimension, because you know that you have a complementary relationship with your boss. So whatever words you are using, it has the meaning is one dimension, the content is one dimension, and the other dimension is the relationship dimension. The same thing, for example, they submit this report at my desk tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. a.m. sharp. If this same sentence, same statement is made by a friend, you will not listen to your friend. Why? Because you will say, the relationship is equal or symmetrical, so you have a chance over there to say no to your friend, but you cannot do this with your boss, because you as interpersonal communicators, we should be aware of the relationship status as discussed earlier. So whenever you're communicating with other people, it has a content dimension, it has a relationship dimension as well. The next thing about interpersonal communication is a series of punctuated events. Now, what this means? Punctuated events, as I was saying, events are one of the elements of interpersonal communication, and events have a major role or as far as interpersonal communication is concerned. Now, what is the meaning of punctuated? I will explain you with an example, further explanation. Events are divided into stimuli and responses. As you know that in interpersonal communication, we are having face-to-face communication, we are having oral communication. So we know that the other person is sitting in front of us and we are communicating. Right? These events are defined as stimuli and responses. Stimuli is something which triggers, or you can say which can become a cause of your response. Now, what this means? Look, for example, if I am the speaker and you are the listener, if I say something, right, you will first listen to what I have said. Now, whatever I have said will become a stimuli or cause for you to respond. And when you will respond, when you will reply back, for me as a speaker, your reply, your response will become a cause or stimuli for me to give further response. So this happens, you can say this continues. This stimuli is one event and response is another event. And when we are saying interpersonal communication is a series of punctuated events, तो आप notice करेंगे कि भाई मैंने कुछ आपको कहा, तो आपके लिए जो मैं कहूँगा वो स्टिमुलाई हो जाएगा या कॉज हो जाएगा, एंड उसकी बेसिस के ऊपर आप रिस्पॉन्स देंगे. तो मैंने जो कहा वो एक इवेंट है, और जो आपका रिस्पॉन्स आया वो दूसरा इवेंट है. तो इसी तरीके से ये गोज ऑन होता है, स्टिमुलाई रिस्पॉन्स, इट कंटिन्यूज. So whenever you are communicating with your friends, with anyone who interpersonally, you are actually dividing your communication into various events which are, one event is stimuli, the other event is response, and we can just punctuate them. Stimuli full stop, response full stop means the speaker and the listeners obviously whatever communication is going on, it can be easily noticed that one is the stimuli event and the other is the response event, and it goes on and on, right? आपने नोटिस किया होगा कभी कभी कि जो है हम कोई टॉपिक पे किसी अपने दोस्त के साथ बात करते रहते हैं, अचानक क्या होता है कि जो है जिस टॉपिक पे हम बात कर रहे होते हैं कहीं और निकल जाते हैं हम लोग बात करते करते। उसकी वजह यही है कि मैं जो कहूंगा आपसे, आपके लिए वो क्या होगा, स्टिमुलाई होगा या कॉज होगा फॉर यू टू रिस्पॉन्स, फॉर यू टू गिव रिस्पॉन्स। सो जैसे भी मैं आपको कुछ कहूंगा, आप उसकी बेसिस के ऊपर आप रिस्पॉन्स देंगे, फिर आप जब रिस्पॉन्स देंगे तो मेरे लिए स्टिमुलाई बन जाएगा वो, और मैं फिर रिस्पॉन्स दूंगा। तो एक बात जो शुरू होती है कहीं से कहीं निकल जाती है बिकॉज ऑफ punctuated events, because of this is what the series is all about. So it can be divided easily into stimuli and response and punctuated easily all these events, and this is how we understand interpersonal communication, that it is a series of punctuated events. So understanding or the communication, or dividing the communication into stimuli and response, is really important for both speakers and listeners to have, so in order to have you can say the effective communication interpersonally, or successful interpersonal communication. And not just interpersonal communication, but it's also important for empathy, right? And it's also important for empathizing with others, because you need to understand the feelings and emotions of others, the speaker and the listeners. So not only dividing interpersonal communication into series of punctuated events is important for understanding, but it is also important for empathy. Those people who cannot understand the relationship dimensions and who cannot respond properly to stimuli and response events, they will not be able to communicate successfully interpersonally. तो एक तो ये चीज हो गई। उसके बाद है इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन इज इनएविटेबल, इरिवर्सिबल एंड अनरिपीटेबल। इनएविटेबल का मतलब ये होता है कि हम इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन हमेशा ही करते हैं, सही है। वो कैसे, क्योंकि जाहिर सी बात है वी कैन नॉट लिव इन आइसोलेशन एज ह्यूमन बीइंग्स। जब से हम पैदा हुए हैं और जब तक हम मरेंगे हम मुस्तकिल कम्युनिकेशन करते हैं। तो कम्युनिकेशन इटसेल्फ इज इनएविटेबल, इट विल ऑलवेज हैपन, whether you are silent, whether you are speaking or not, whether you are using words or whether you are just using non-verbal communication or signs and symbols, you are actually communicating all the time. So कम्युनिकेशन, हम ये एक समझ लीजिए एक फैकल्टी अल्लाह ताला ने हमें सलाहियत दी है कि हम हमेशा कम्युनिकेट करते रहते हैं पूरी जिंदगी। सो इसी तरीके से इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन भी इनएविटेबल है, मींस इट विल ऑलवेज हैपन, राइट। वन कैन नॉट कम्युनिकेट, मींस कि आप यू विल ऑलवेज कम्युनिकेट। तो इनएविटेबल होती है इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन। You will obviously, in order to have, and you cannot live in isolation as well. You need people, you need friends, you need supporters with whom you can have relationships with them, and obviously you will communicate with them as well. So this communication, which is interpersonal, it will always happen. It is inevitable. Irreversible का मतलब होता है कि आपने कुछ अगर कहा होता है तो आप उसको रिवर्स नहीं कर सकते। वंस यू हैव सेड समथिंग orally, obviously, and you will be doing mostly in face-to-face communication, you cannot take it back, you cannot take those words back, right? तो कभी कभी आपने नोटिस किया होगा कि आपके मुंह से कोई चीज निकल जाती है, आपने कुछ बोला है तो दूसरा बंदा जो है वो नाराज हो जाता है आपसे, फिर आप क्या करते हैं, उसको डिफेंड करने की कोशिश करते हैं अपने आर्ग्यूमेंट को। आप बोलते हैं मेरा मतलब ये नहीं था, मेरा मतलब कुछ और था। तो समटाइम्स आप सिर्फ ये कर सकते हैं, वंस यू हैव सेड समथिंग, उसके लिए आप अपोलोजाइज कर सकते हैं, आप उसके लिए जो है फर्दर एक्सप्लेनेशन दे सकते हैं, बट यू कैन नॉट टेक इट बैक। सो वी नीड टू बी वेरी केयरफुल अबाउट इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन, सो दैट we should not hurt the feelings of others or try to be offensive, right? And we should also not try to be ambiguous, or if we feel that कोई ambiguity create होगी, कोई ambiguous language हम use कर रहे होंगे, तो हमें चाहिए कि और ज्यादा उसको further explain करें ताकि दूसरे बंदे को, listener को जो है पूरी बात हमारी समझ में आ जाए। So once you have said, whenever you are communicating, जब भी आप देखेंगे दोस्तों में अक्सर औकात बात करते करते लड़ाई हो जाती है। वो इसलिए क्योंकि एक दोस्त कह रहा होता है मेरा मतलब ये नहीं था, मैं कुछ और समझाना चाह रहा था, दूसरा दोस्त कहता नहीं तुम्हारा मतलब वो था। तो क्योंकि लोग ध्यान नहीं रखते when they are communicating interpersonally, so you need to be careful that once anything which will come out of your mouth obviously will not be taken back, and you will have to apologize, you will have to use tag questions, you will have to defend yourself, you need to be defensive at that time. अनरिपीटेबल एक है चीज इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन में, जाहिर सी बात है आपने जो भी चीज कहा है उसको एग्जैक्टली आप रिपीट नहीं कर सकते, ना कोई आपकी बात को एग्जैक्टली रिपीट कर सकता, क्योंकि हर दफा आप जब भी कुछ कहेंगे कभी स्टाइल डिफरेंट हो सकता है, कभी वर्ड्स डिफरेंट हो जाते हैं, कभी जो है आपका एक्सेंट चेंज हो जाता है, कभी आप जो पॉजेस देते हैं बिटवीन कम्युनिकेशन वो तब्दील हो जाते हैं। तो इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के अंदर भी ऐसी है कि यू कैन नॉट रिपीट, इवन आप अगर रिकॉर्ड भी कर लें उसको कम्युनिकेशन को और जो है उसको याद भी कर लें और एक दूसरे आदमी को एग्जैक्टली रिपीट करने की कोशिश करें तो वो नहीं हो पाएगा, क्योंकि कॉन्टेक्स्ट चेंज हो जाता है, ऑब्वियसली सिचुएशन तब्दील हो सकती है, टाइम ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन चेंज हो सकता है, तो इसलिए इट कैन नॉट बी अनरिपीटेबल। सो इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन इज इनएविटेबल, इरिवर्सिबल, अनरिपीटेबल। सो ये ऑल एक्सियम्स है, ये बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट एक्सियम्स है, आपको समझना चाहिए। एग्जाम्स में इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चंस आते हैं, तो इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चंस आ सकते हैं इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के। एक और है एक्सियम इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन का, वो है डिजिटल एंड एनालॉजिक। ये मिसाल के तौर पे आपके जो स्टडी टेक्स्ट है उसके अंदर तो मेंशन नहीं है, लेकिन कई जगहों पे आपको मिलेगा, जैसा सीए की स्टडी टेक्स्ट है या दूसरी बुक्स हैं, वहाँ पे एक और एक्सियम को इन्होंने जो है इंक्लूड किया हुआ है, वो है इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन इज डिजिटल एंड एनालॉजिक। डिजिटल तो समझ लीजिए सिंपल बात है, बिकॉज व्हेन वी आर कम्युनिकेटिंग इंटरपर्सनली, देखिए एक तो इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन जो कि अंदर हो रही है आपके, ओनली यू नो अबाउट इट। इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन तो लोगों के साथ होती है, तो जो आप अल्फाज यूज कर रहे होते हैं, द वर्ड्स यूज कर रहे होते हैं, या कोई ऐसे सिंबल्स यूज कर रहे होते हैं या साइंस यूज कर रहे होते हैं जो कि दूसरे लोगों को मतलब पता होता है, जो कि बड़े कॉमन मीनिंग्स होती हैं, वो होता है डिजिटल। यानी वर्ड्स कह लीजिए जो कि डिस्क्रीट होते हैं, डेफिनेट होते हैं, जो कि स्पेसिफिक होते हैं, तो वर्ड्स को हम कह सकते हैं वो डिजिटल। जो भी अल्फाज आप यूज कर रहे हैं वो है डिजिटल। एक तो डिजिटल का मतलब ये है कि भाई आप कोई कंप्यूटर टेक्नोलॉजी यूज कर रहे हैं या इलेक्ट्रॉनिक टेक्नोलॉजी यूज कर रहे हैं, लेकिन यहाँ पे इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में एनीथिंग विच कैन बी इजीली नोटिस और एनीथिंग विच कैन be understood by everyone according to the culture where they are living in, that is what digital is। और इसका बेस्ट एग्जांपल जो है वर्ड्स, इसके अलावा कुछ एक्शंस भी, कोई सिंबल्स या नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन भी डिजिटल हो सकती है। वो कैसे? मिसाल के तौर पे कोई सिंबल्स या साइंस हैं जो कि रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, जैसे एक मिसाल के तौर पे साइन है पीस साइन, जिसके अंदर वी का हम शेप बनाते हैं लोगों के सामने, हम जो है वी लोगों को दिखाते हैं, तो उसका मतलब है पीस साइन, और ये यूनिवर्सल है, पूरी दुनिया को पता है कि ये वी साइन जो है ये पीस का साइन है, तो ये भी डिजिटल है। तो एनी वर्ड्स or any symbols or signs which we are making, which have some specific meanings or discrete meanings which normally people know about it, is digital। एनालॉजिक क्या चीज होती है? एनालॉजिक थोड़ी सी ये पैरा लैंग्वेज की तरफ है। पैरा लैंग्वेज इज ऑल्सो टाइप ऑफ नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन, जिसमें आपको क्या होता है, जब भी आपसे कम्युनिकेशन कोई कर रहा होता है तो आप नोटिस करेंगे कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ जेस्चर्स और बॉडी मूवमेंट्स और एक्सप्रेशंस द अदर पर्सन इज मेकिंग। अब जरूरी नहीं है कि आप जो इस एक्सप्रेशंस को यूनिवर्सली समझें, it depends from person to person how you can understand what the body movements or the gestures the other person is making or facial expressions the other person is making। that is what analogic is। इसको और थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए हम नॉर्मली पैरा लैंग्वेज को कॉन्सेप्ट को डिस्कस करते हैं। मिसाल तौर पे ये जो आपकी जो स्पीड ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन है या वॉइस है या वॉइस क्वालिटी है या वॉल्यूम को अप एंड डाउन करने की वाली बात है या टोन है, टोन ऑफ योर कम्युनिकेशन है, तो ये सब चीजें जो है ना पैरा लैंग्वेज है और एनालॉजिक है। इसको आपको इन्फर करना पड़ेगा, एंड इट कैन हैव अ डिफरेंट मीनिंग फ्रॉम पर्सन टू पर्सन, फ्रॉम पीपल टू पीपल, राइट। सो ये कोई जरूरी नहीं कि यूनिवर्सल हो इसकी मीनिंग्स, डिस्क्रीट या डेफिनेट मीनिंग्स हो। जैसा वर्ड्स के अंदर तो डेफिनेट मीनिंग्स होती हैं, यूनिवर्सल मीनिंग्स होती हैं, लेकिन पैरा लैंग्वेज के अंदर या एनालॉजिक पार्ट ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के अंदर आपको वहां पे इन्फर करना पड़ेगा, आपको वहां पे समझना पड़ेगा कि व्हाट द एक्सप्रेशंस ऑफ और द जेस्चर्स द अदर पर्सन इज मेकिंग, और उसकी कोई मीनिंग आपको जनरेट करना पड़ेगा इन योर ओन वे। दैट इज व्हाट पैरा लैंग्वेज इज। और मैंने आपको बताया ना कि वेरिएशन इन द वॉइस, वेरिएशन इन द स्पीड है या टोन ऑफ वॉइस है या वॉल्यूम है, ये सब चीजें पैरा लैंग्वेज है, ये सब चीजें एनालॉजिक है। तो अगर मिसाल तो मैं कोई, जैसे मैं एग्जांपल दूं आपको कि मैं किसी से कहूं कि व्हाट आर यू डूइंग, एक तो होता है आई विल से इट सॉफ्टली पोलाइटली, सो इट हैज अ डिफरेंट मीनिंग। लेकिन अगर इसी बात को मैं गुस्से से कहूं कि व्हाट आर यू डूइंग, तो वहां पे दूसरा बंदा जो है वॉल्यूम क्योंकि मैंने रेस किया है तो वो समझ जाएगा कि भाई आई एम एंग्री, I'm showing some distaste or I'm showing some sign of aggression. और वही बात, यही अल्फाज अगर मैं सॉफ्टली कहूंगा तो वो समझ जाएगा obviously that I am in a good mood and I'm more polite. So ये जो 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 वॉल्यूम का अप एंड डाउन होना है या वेरिएशन होना है, that is what paralanguage is, that is what analogic is, and you have to use inference in order to understand what analogic is. डिजिटल मैंने आपको बता दिया, हर अल्फाज जो है उसके अपने मतलब होता है, वो पर्टिकुलरली आप जो है उसकी मीनिंग्स होती हैं, और ऐसे सिंबल्स या साइंस जिसके मीनिंग्स जैसे दुनिया में सबको पता है, तो वो डिजिटल है। तो ये है कुछ एक्सियम्स ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन जो कि इम्पॉर्टेंट है। यू नीड टू रीड अबाउट इट, you need to understand all these axioms, and whenever we are communicating interpersonally with the other person, obviously, as I said, it is a type of oral communication, it is face to face communication। उसके एग्जांपल्स भी मैंने आपको दिए, इंटरव्यू के दौरान, मीटिंग्स हैं, या ग्रुप डिस्कशन है, या फ्रेंड्स के साथ कम्युनिकेशन है, ये सब एग्जांपल्स हैं इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के। सो वी as participants of interpersonal communication, in order to effectively and successfully do interpersonal communication, we should be aware of these axioms or rules or principles of interpersonal communication। एक लास्ट टॉपिक है जो कि इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन से रिलेटेड है, जो कि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है अपार्ट फ्रॉम एक्सियम्स। एक दूसरा टॉपिक है वो है यूनिवर्सल्स ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन। दिस इज वन ऑफ द, ये आप कह सकते हैं लास्ट टॉपिक है जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट है। उसके अलावा भी और भी टॉपिक्स हैं, आप बुक से पढ़ सकते हैं कि अलग अलग किस्म की डेफिनेशंस दी हुई है इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन की। जैसे एक डेवलपमेंटल और रिलेशनल डेफिनेशन अलग है, एक कंपोनेंशनल डेफिनेशन है, एक जो है कॉन्टेक्चुअल डेफिनेशन है, तो ये आप पढ़ सकते हैं बुक से। लेकिन ये जो यूनिवर्सल्स ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन है, ये भी बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है, इस पे से रिलेटेड भी एमसीक्यूज आते हैं। एक्चुअली ये यूनिवर्सल्स जो है ना, वो है कंपोनेंट्स का समझ लीजिए आप, या कॉन्सेप्ट्स ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन समझ। हमने yesterday we discussed about the components of process of communication, which components of communication जो कि process के अंदर शामिल था, जैसे sender, receiver, messages, channel, feedback, ये all those were the communication were the components or elements of communication process। इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के जो एलिमेंट्स हैं या कह लीजिए कंपोनेंट्स हैं वो ज्यादा है। एक नॉर्मल कम्युनिकेशन तो बहुत सारी टाइप्स की हो सकती हैं, लेकिन इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के जो यूनिवर्सल्स हैं वो तकरीबन 10 कंपोनेंट्स हैं। वैसे तो देखा जाए तो हर कम्युनिकेशन में ये कंपोनेंट्स आ सकते हैं, तो हम इसको थोड़ा सा जल्दी जल्दी डिस्कस कर लेते हैं, ज़्यादा मुश्किल नहीं है। पहला जो कंपोनेंट है वो है सोर्स एंड रिसीवर। वहाँ पे जो नॉर्मल कम्युनिकेशन प्रोसेस के अंदर हमने जब डिस्कस किया था, तो वहाँ पे एक था सेंडर, ऑब्वियसली वन ऑफ द कंपोनेंट, द अदर कंपोनेंट वाज रिसीवर। यहाँ पे क्या है, यहाँ पे दोनों कंपोनेंट्स को एक साथ कर दिया है, सोर्स एंड रिसीवर। यहाँ पे हम सेंडर को सोर्स कहते हैं, और रिसीवर ऑब्वियसली वो बंदा है जिस हु इज रिसीविंग इंफॉर्मेशन, बिकॉज ये फेस टू फेस कम्युनिकेशन होती है। तो यहाँ पे भी ऑब्वियसली सेंडर एंड रिसीवर्स आर इन्वॉल्वड इन द कम्युनिकेशन प्रोसेस, and but we call the sender as the source. So this is the first universal or component of interpersonal communication. Second one is encoding and decoding. Obviously, when you are communicating with people, you need to encode, that is the send the information, and decoding means you have to understand what you receive the information and you understand it. So it happens in interpersonal communication as well. Third component, कह सकते हैं competence and performance. Both the participants who are all the participants who are involved in interpersonal communication, they need to be competent and they have to perform successfully in order to have a effective interpersonal communication. Now what is the meaning of competence? कॉम्पिटेंस आप समझ लीजिए आपकी जो नॉलेज और एक्सपीरियंस होता है, आपके पास जो भी सलाहियत है, कैपेबिलिटी है टू कम्युनिकेट, दैट इज व्हाट कॉम्पिटेंस इज ऑल अबाउट। या आपको मैं एक दूसरा एग्जांपल इसका देता हूँ कि मिसाल तौर पे यू आर डूइंग सीएमए, and after you will complete your CMA, you will be considered as a competent person, as a skillful person who has knowledge about your subjects, about cost and management accountancy, and you will be quite experienced in other things. So that is what your skill is all about. That is the competence. But how you will perform at the job, that's a different story, right? There may be people who are equally competent, they are equally capable, but the performance at the job will vary according to person. So same is the case in interpersonal communication. These two, the competence and performance, obviously, the people who are involved in interpersonal communication, they should be skillful to communicate interpersonally. They should know about the axioms. They should know about the dynamics of interpersonal communication, and also in order to have a better performance and successful performance, both between sender and the receiver of information, they should obviously be careful how they are communicating with each other, so that the performance can be improved. फोर्थ, जैसा वहां पे था प्रोसेस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन में एक मैसेज होता है और चैनल ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन थ्रू विच यू ट्रांसमिट इंफॉर्मेशन, यहाँ पे भी ऑब्वियसली ये मैसेजिंग एंड चैनलिंग कैन बी कंसिडर्ड एज वन ऑफ द कंपोनेंट्स ऑफ इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन। यहाँ पे भी ऑब्वियसली मैसेज कैन बी short, it can be long, message can be verbal, it can be non-verbal, obviously, and obviously it can be one word or it can be the whole report. This, so all this is what message is. Verbal and non-verbal as well. Channel, there can be various channels. Here the channel obviously is face-to-face communication, or you can say sometimes you are obviously doing interpersonal communication on a telephone as well. You can also use some of the device or video chat. That is also interpersonal communication, but mostly interpersonal communication happens face-to-face, and that is what the channel of communication is. Oral communication, face-to-face communication. Noise, obviously noise and barrier are part of interpersonal communication as well. It happens with all kinds of communication that some sort of barriers can occur, right? All types of barriers: physical, technical, psychological, physiological, and obviously the semantic or language barriers can happen. And same is the case with interpersonal communication. We have already discussed some of the through examples today, that how barriers can occur. For example, ambiguity or other things, not understanding how to punctuate events can be a barrier as well. So it's part of all types of communication, and it is also part of interpersonal communication. Just if you talk about process of communication, वहाँ पे feedback बड़ा important होता है. यहाँ पे दोनों important है. Self feedback भी important है और feedback from others भी. As if you are the speaker and the other person is the listener, so the listener has to give some sort of feedback in the form of reflection or empathy, right? Or in the form of some sort of message, right? Or gesture or verbal or non-verbal feedback can be given by the other person. Face to face, right? But you are also receiving self feedback, which you are doing, which you are giving to yourself. You're not just speaking, but you're also giving feedback to yourself, and it is internal. It has to do with intrapersonal communication, right? Context, right, is one of the other universe of interpersonal communication. Yes. I consider that it should also be the part of normal process of communication, because normally we did not discuss about this process in the process of communication, that context is one of the most important component, but especially it is important in interpersonal communication. Context means the situation, or you can say the event, or you can say the overall situation of communication. And as you know that in interpersonal communication, this context can change from situation to situation, from time to time. Context can be understood. There are three types of contextual dimensions, and that's the first one is the physical. तो physical का मतलब ये है कि जो setting है, physical setting जो है, कहाँ पे आप interpersonal communication कर रहे हैं. क्लासरूम में आप अपने दोस्त से बात कर रहे हैं या अपने peer या colleague से बात कर रहे हैं, तो वहाँ पे situation, physical setting different है. कोई funeral आपने attend किया, वहाँ पे जाके आप कम्युनिकेट कर रहे हैं, तो वहां पे फिजिकल डायमेंशन चेंज हो गया. आप मिसाल तौर पे आप मीटिंग के अंदर हैं, बिजनेस मीटिंग के अंदर है, तो वहां पे सारी बातें, वो एनवायरनमेंट चेंज हो गया, कॉन्टेक्स्ट चेंज हो गया. सो कॉन्टेक्स्ट चेंजेस फ्रॉम where you are. Actually, context has an effect on interpersonal communication. The physical setting, one context is physical, the other context can be social and psychological. As I said, लोगों की जो रिलेशनशिप डिपेंड होती है इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन के अंदर, जो ऑब्वियसली जनरेट होती है या एस्टेब्लिश होती है, वो सोशल एंड साइकोलॉजिकल डायमेंशंस के कॉन्टेक्चुअल बेसिस के ऊपर हो सकती है। मिसाल के तौर पे आप कि अपनी कितनी पावर आपके पास है, अथॉरिटी है, या स्टेटस इन द सोसाइटी आपकी है, ये सब जो है सोशल एंड साइकोलॉजिकल डायमेंशंस होती हैं जो कि अफेक्ट करती हैं आपके इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन को। सो दिस इज वन ऑफ द यूनिवर्सल टेम्पोरल डायमेंशंस, द टाइम ऑफ temporal. What is the most important thing, you can say, a temporary thing in this world which changes all the time, that is the time itself. तो आपको ये देखना पड़ता है कि where you are actually communicating, what is the time of the day, are you communicating interpersonally in the morning or in the evening or at night. So time can also have one of the effect on your interpersonal communication. तो obviously these are the three contextual dimension. Actually ये तीनों चीजें डिफाइन करती है context of communication को, which is one of the major component of interpersonal communication. Physical तो आपको मैंने बताया कि जो कि आप इसको नोटिस कर सकते हैं, फिजिकल सेटिंग हो गई. सोशल साइकोलॉजिकल वो है जो आपके स्टेटस इन द सोसाइटी है, और टेम्परल आपका टाइम ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन, जो किस वक्त आप कम्युनिकेट कर रहे हैं, तो वो आपका जो है टेम्पोरल डायमेंशन कहलाता है. फील्ड ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस पहले हमने डिस्कस किया था. फ्रेम्स ऑफ रेफरेंसेस, जब हम एलिमेंट्स को डिस्कस कर रहे थे इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन को, तो वहां पे हमने डिस्कस किया था कि जो है इंट्रापर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन एक तो है जो कि कम्युनिकेशन विद इन. फ्रेम्स ऑफ रेफरेंसेस या फील्ड ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस वो होता है जो कि आपके पास नॉलेज या एक्सपीरियंस है. all knowledge, experience, your attitudes, your emotions, your feelings are part of your frames of references or your field of experience. So obviously from person to person the field of experience is different. You may have different emotions and feelings, you have different attitudes, you may have a different culture, you have your different kind of knowledge or experiences, but with you, so your field experience can be different from the other person field of experience. So we try to actually find some commonalities or similarities, or try to find out some shared meanings between the and we try to obviously have a similar kind of experience with the other person when we are communicating interpersonally. But obviously field of experience is part of one of the important universal or component of interpersonal communication, and you need to find out some sort of middle ground in order to communicate successfully when you are having interpersonal communication. Effects, exactly, communication का हर वर्ड का, हर सेंटेंस का, हर सिंबल का, साइन का कोई ना कोई इफेक्ट तो होगा दूसरे पर्सन के ऊपर. ऑब्वियसली इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन, और जो इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन है वो तो वैसी फेस टू फेस कम्युनिकेशन है, तो वहां तो उसी वक्त देयर एंड देन आपको पता चल जाता है कि व्हाट इज द रिस्पॉन्स, हाउ द अदर पर्सन इज रिस्पॉन्डिंग टू योर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स और योर कम्युनिकेशन. सो इट विल हैव अ मेजर इफेक्ट, इट विल चेंज द इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन the moment you actually say anything in front of the other person. Ethics तो हमेशा आपको पता है कि it's part of communication. Ethical, हमें हमेशा whenever we are communicating we have to follow etiquettes and ethics all the time. Business ethics की यहाँ पे बात हो रही है. हमने कल भी थोड़ा सा डिस्कस किया था ethical communication का, जब हम ये बात कर रहे थे 7 C's के बारे में, उसका ये characteristics of communication को डिस्कस कर रहे थे, जिसमें हम conciseness, consideration, courtesy, clarity, completeness, correctness, concreteness, इन सब concepts को हम जब डिस्कस कर रहे थे yesterday. So these are all parts of ethics. क्योंकि ये हम क्यों इतनी ज्यादा एथिकल कम्युनिकेशन करने की सोचेंगे, क्योंकि जाहिर सी बात है हम ये जो कॉन्सेप्ट हमने डिस्कस किए थे कल, जिसकी हमें फिक्र होगी लोगों की, हम चाहेंगे कि भाई सक्सेसफुल एथिकल कम्युनिकेशन हो, ऑनेस्टी के साथ, सिंसेरिटी के साथ जो कम्युनिकेशन हो, तो हमें इन सब चीज़ों का ख्याल रखना पड़ेगा. ऑब्वियसली जो कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन होती है, इट्स पार्ट ऑफ एथिक्स बाय द वे. कल हमने एक और कॉन्सेप्ट डिस्कस किया था इंक्लूसिव लैंग्वेज का, जिसके अंदर हम ये बताते हैं कि वी शुड नॉट बी बायस एंड डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी टुवर्ड्स अदर, वी शुड नॉट be offensive or hurt the feelings of others. So all these things are part of ethical communication, and obviously when you are communicating interpersonally you have to follow the rules of ethical communication so that your communication is successful and effective. So ये आज हमने डिस्कस किया है दो चीजें. हमने ऑब्वियसली अभी तक जो है आज हमने ओरल कम्युनिकेशन के कुछ एस्पेक्ट्स को डिस्कस किया, और हमने इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन जो कि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है आपके सिलेबस का, उसको हमने डिस्कस किया. और जो है टुमारो वी विल स्टार्ट विथ रिटन कम्युनिकेशन, जिसके अंदर हमें राइटिंग प्रोसेस को डिस्कस करना है, मेमोरेंडम्स एंड बिजनेस लेटर्स की बात करनी है, और क्योंकि ये बड़ा मेजर टॉपिक कल हम डिस्कस करेंगे रिटन कम्युनिकेशन, क्योंकि यू आर असेस्ड इन एग्जाम्स थ्रू योर रिटन कम्युनिकेशन। आपको रीडिंग करनी पड़ेगी एग्जाम में, आपको राइटिंग करनी होगी एग्जाम में, तो जाहिर सी बात है दिस इज वन ऑफ द मेजर का कंपोनेंट ऑफ यू कैन से योर सिलेबस। तो आज हम एंड करते हैं अपने लेक्चर को। हमने आज ओरल कम्युनिकेशन और इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन को डिस्कस किया। अभी तक हमने तकरीबन जो 4 मेजर टॉपिक्स हैं आपके सिलेबस के वो कवर कर लिए हैं। इन द रेस्ट ऑफ द 4 days हम we will try to complete all the other topics as well, inshallah. So see you tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.